Hello everyone. So this will be an introductory lecture of our PGP Plus program. In today's lecture, we will try to understand what exactly political science is all about, where this subject is taking roots from, and some understanding with regard to the nature and scope of the given subject. And once we are done with that, we will go to the very first topic, which is the classics. Okay, so this topic classics is mentioned in your booklet number 1 itself before you start Western political thinkers. Okay, now when we talk about political science, the term political is derived from polis. Okay, term polis. Polis means city states. Okay, so see, when we are talking about in general politics, political philosophy, political science, etc., its roots are in ancient Greece, which used to be made up of multiple city states like Athens, Sparta, etc. Got it? Now, when we say city states, you can understand them more or less like self-sufficient geographical units where certain people are living, they are having their vocation, they are having their jobs, and they are also interdependent on each other. But overall, one particular city state is self-sufficient in itself. Modern day example can be NCR region. NCR region, if you see, you can call it more or less like a city state. Now, when we say polis in general, or when we are trying to understand city state, the city states of ancient Greece, they were quite different. And when we move to medieval times, the nature of these geographies, the territorial boundaries changed, and we see the rise of empire systems of kingdoms. Okay, Roman Empire, so on, so forth. And these empires were largely, you can say, multicultural regions. Okay, so there used to be an emperor, Roman emperor, but then there were lot of units below him. They had certain freedoms in certain respects, but in some fields like say foreign affairs and all, they were largely driven by the Roman emperor. And this empire system was a way to accommodate different people, different languages, different communities, and this system continued at least in medieval times. But then 1648 Treaty of Westphalia. Okay, here for the first time the concept of modern nation states come into picture. Okay, as we see India, Bangladesh, United States of America, China, they are the modern conception of the state, polis जो हम बोल रहे हैं. So see, the idea is to understand that even the nature of polis has kept on changing. ठीक है, एक तरफ you were talking about the city states, the self-sufficient entities, then came the larger areas in the form of empires which were built by multi-regions. The idea was to accommodate different cultures, different languages. But the modern nation state is more or less based on, if we talk about the Western nation states, they are largely based upon one language, one country, one ethnicity, one country. So that multiculturalism thing is breaking down and a kind of modern nation state is coming into picture. Got it? So when we say modern nation state, or when we say nation state, here nation means a sense of belongingness. Okay, the sense of belongingness, which can be due to language, which can be due to your religion, which can be due to some cultural, geographical factor. And when this community of people who have a sense of belongingness, they also end up getting a boundary, a state, a geography, then it is known as nation state. So if we talk about Israel today, Israel is both a nation as well as a state, so it's a nation state. But when we talk about Palestinians, so Palestinians are a nation because they have this sense of belongingness, but they do not have a state. Got it? So Palestinians cannot be called the nation state. So this is how the idea of polis has evolved, starting from the ancient Greece, when we are concerned about self-sufficient city-states like Athens and Sparta. Now, the second term is science. Okay. Now, science term is derived from another term which is known as episteme. Got it? Episteme. And episteme means knowledge. Okay. Episteme means knowledge. So political science is something which deals with the knowledge about the state, how state functions, how governance is done, so on, so forth. That is why it is also said that political science, this has been said by Garner, that political science begins and ends with state. Okay, state is the core unit in your political science. So this is a broad understanding that when we are talking about political science, how this particular term is coming into derivation. Got it? Now, next we will try to understand nature and scope. Okay. Now see, this topic also gets linked to your topic in paper 2A, which is comparative politics. There also they have mentioned nature and scope and all. So those things get linked there as well. This is a very introductory thing so that you can sail through the Western political thinkers to start with, which is in your booklet number 1. Got it? Now when we say nature, this question largely emerges because, see, there are two terms that we have to understand. One is normative, another is factual or descriptive. Okay. Normative means something which is related to some values, some ought to things, some futuristic things. Normative, when we say ought to be. And when we say factual or descriptive, it means it is what is happening now, what is happening currently. Got it? So the question around political science emerge in terms of nature is that, is political science normative science or is political science descriptive science? Got it? Now this debate is never ending debate, as you will see eventually as well. There will be debates, there will be movements like behavioralism, post-behavioralism, etc. But those topics are to be done later on. I'm just opening this debate that why there is a debate on the nature of political science as a discipline. Because some believe that political science should be normative science because it deals with values like liberty, equality, etc. And these things are not as it is things. There is always a scope of improvement. There is always a scope of ought to questions. Aisa hota to kya hota? If something like this happens, what would have happened? So always there is a question around normativity, and that is why the nature of political science should be normative. But on the other hand, some scholars believe that political science, as the term science denotes, it comes close to the natural science tradition. Okay, natural science tradition, that is physics, chemistry, biology, where you observe things, you collect data, and on that basis you end up creating theories. Okay, now when I say theory, theory means a general statement which has been proved correct. Got it? Theory means a general statement which has been proved correct. So how do science work? How do science give the theory? The scientific method of giving theory is that you observe reality, you observe a phenomena. If that phenomenon keeps on repeating one after other, you try to make us understand that phenomena in terms of a general statement. Say for example, sun rises in the east. Somebody would have observed it, continuously observed it, and then they give this general statement that okay, sun rises in the east. This is how theoretification in your science happens, wherein you go from particular to general. Okay, what is particular? That you keep observing individual facts. You ultimately, if these facts keep on repeating one after other, you get to understand okay, there's a general phenomena behind that, and you try to carve out that particular general phenomena and you call it theory. Okay, this method is also known as inductive method. Okay, this method is also known as inductive method. So when I say inductive method, it means scientific method. It means moving from particular to general. That means you observe a lot of realities happening around you, you collect data, you believe in repetition, and once that happens, you tend to generalize that particular statement. Got it? Now, political science, as I told you, it deals with norms, values, justice and all. But these things cannot be observed all the time. Sometimes you also have to look at your logic, reason, and that is why, and if you see, a lot of times the methods of political science are deductive. Okay, deductive. Here deductive means moving from general to particular. Okay, moving from general to particular. When I say general, you first come up with a statement. Say for example, you come up with the statement that America is the superpower. This is a general statement. Do you have any proof? Not yet. But then once you have come with a general statement, then you go on to feed with particular data, etc. And then you try to make your general statement correct. You may succeed, you may not succeed. Okay. So political science being a normative science, its methods are generally like this. And that is why political science cannot be completely made a factual science or natural science. This is the debate on the nature of political science. Now, this is also happening because political science is largely coming from political philosophy. Okay. And when I say philosophy, philosophy means search or love for knowledge. Okay. And when this knowledge deals with policy, state, okay, political activities and all, then it becomes political philosophy. Got it? And of course, philosophy has also got to do with ethics. Got it? You are trying to understand the broader perspectives of human life, human aspects, how the conduct should be done at the individual level, so on, so forth. So that is why this question around nature comes into picture. Now, the second part is the scope. Scope will largely deal with that what is the subject matter of political science. Because recently we just saw this statement that political science begins and ends with the state. And when we say state, state largely represents public sphere. Okay. Public sphere, the institutions of governments, parliament, army, etc., they all will be part and parcel of the state. But then thus political science also should get or look into the private sphere, which is your, say, family and all. Family, what happens, or maybe should political science also deal with issues, say, between husband and wife, because it's a private affair. So see, this was a debate, and the ancient Greek thinking was more or less about the separation between, a strict separation between private sphere and public sphere. Okay? Aristotle is the one who will do this kind of segregation. But you know, modern understanding is what, especially after the feminists and all, they rose. They see state has a very prominent role in terms of, looking into the private matters as well, like divorce, property things, and passing of property, so on, so forth. How can you say that the scope of political science is only in the public sphere? So today there is a broad understanding that the subject matter of political science has expanded. And earlier, even if you talk about state, earlier political science was largely concerned with the issues around state. But today there are a lot of new issues that has also come into picture. Say for example, political science also deals with the politics of environment, terrorism, okay, human rights, so on, so forth. So nature and scope that has expanded, that has changed. Got it? So this is a very overall and broad understanding of where political science is coming from, what we are trying to understand in this particular subject, which is your political science as a discipline, so on, so forth. Now, if it's a science, political science, it is based on certain concepts. Of course, it will have its own vocabulary. Okay, every subject has its own vocabulary, every subject has its own set of rules and regulations. Say for example, when you do mathematics, it has its own language, okay, plus, minus, addition, subtraction. Similarly, once you do political science, it has its own terms, like as your syllabus describes, values like liberty, equality, fraternity, concepts like justice, democracy, theories, and everything around that. So it has a very specific connotation of political science around this concepts and vocabulary. Now, where do you pick up these concepts and vocabulary? Now, these things are generally picked up from political thought. Okay. Now, when I say political thought, it generally means thinking of an age, or you may say political thinking of an age. Political thinking of an age. So see, ancient people would think in certain manner. Now, if they're thinking in certain manner, they are going to write in a certain manner. A medieval people, because in medieval times, religion was very important. Okay, so the texts which would come around medieval times, they would be very, very different. Then modern times, again, which is again coming from Renaissance, Enlightenment, Reformation, their thinking and writing will be very different from the earlier thinking. So now we try to pick the concepts, vocabulary, and so on through political thought, which is thinking of an age, and we get to understand about the thinking of a particular age with the help of the texts, or you may say books, written by the thinkers of those times. But will you end up reading every text, every book? That you end up picking this book, that book, any general book? No, because if you end up, reading every kind of book, then it will be very difficult for you to, just finish the task that you have got onto. Got it? So that is why instead of reading every book, you try to understand the classics of different times. Got it? Classics. Now, when I say that the term classics, how do you understand, or how do you define the term classics? Okay. You see, as the name suggests, classics are those texts which are class apart. Okay. These texts have a certain authoritative standing. Okay. They have authoritative standing, and that is why they are the go-to text. If you have to understand about anything, you go on to read these particular texts. Got it? Just say if you talk about the Indian tradition, you go to the Shastras, you try to pick up Vedas. These are authoritative texts to understand the Indian civilization, the evolution of Indian political system, so on, so forth. They say Arth Shastra by Kautilya. It's a classical text. So when we say classics, you use classics to understand a general political thought. You try to pick up the vocabulary, you try to pick up the issues, and that is why the classics are largely which deals with eternal issues. Okay, they deal with a general wisdom, they deal with eternal problems, how to solve them. Classics are universalist, classics are foundational, classics are transcendental, because the kind of depth of analysis that is being done in this classics, that is unparalleled, that is unmatched. So classics are the one, or the classics, because they are class apart, they are the one who are doing a very deep analysis of given issues, and that is why the classics have remained, that is why the classics have not died. Got it? So if you have to understand concept, language, vocabulary of political science, you take help of political thought. Where do you understand the political thought? You understand the political thought through classics. Got it? What are classics? Classics are those texts which are class apart. Got it? Now the classics are the one which you need to interpret now. Say for example, Plato has written Republic, but that was written so many years back. Okay, do we have capacity to understand them now? Do we have the proper understanding of the language, the context that was being done at those point of time? No, that is very difficult. And generally, while interpreting text, we find the problem of language, because you may not decipher the kind of language they are using. You may not decipher what they actually meant when we are using certain word. What was the politics behind that particular thing? What was the history behind that particular thing? So first thing. Secondly, as we know the nature of political science, because why anybody would write a book, why anybody would deal with certain prominent issue, certain political issue. So somewhere it might happen that a certain classics or books might have been written to speak truth to the power. Okay, to speak truth to power. What is truth to power? कि भाई जो उस समय people who are dominating or who are in the power, they might be doing certain thing wrong, and there is some scholar, there is some philosopher who is writing or who is discussing certain topics so that he can bring to the notice that those who are in power, they need to be held accountable, they need to be checked, their authoritativeness needs to be checked. That is known as truth to power. Say for example, as we will proceed, Socrates. Okay, so Socrates was one who used to question the authorities, the existing system. So he was speaking truth to power, and that is why he was even killed. He was given poison. So a lot of times it happens that a particular scholar philosopher may be writing books, but he might be using hidden language. He might be not trying to overtly use the words because he knows that his work might be censored, or he might even lose his life. Got it? That is why it is easier to stick on to one classic, that okay, we are going to study Plato's Republic, but the bigger problem emerges in the form of how to interpret classics. Okay, how to understand, what should be the way to understand the analysis, the deeper analysis which has been given in particular classic, and this is known as hermeneutics. Okay, hermeneutics is the science of interpretation Okay, how to interpret particular classic. Okay, the science behind it, the methods behind that. And when we talk about hermeneutics of classics, we largely have three approaches. One is textual approach. This is largely supported by Leo Strauss. Okay. Then second, we have contextual approach. Which is supported by the scholars like Sabine and Lasky. Okay. Leo Strauss, then you have Sabine and Lasky, and third you have interpretative approach. Okay, this is the final approach, and this is largely supported by the thinkers like Foucault, Derrida, etc. Got it? आपके contextual में ही एक और approach linked है, that is known as New Cambridge approach. हालांकि New Cambridge, you can say it's a middle path between your textual approach and contextual approach. A New Cambridge approach is promoted by the scholars like Quentin Skinner. Okay, Quentin Skinner. So these are 3 or 4 broad approaches that is used in the interpretation of classics. Got it? Let's decipher them one by one. So first is your textual approach. Okay, as the name suggests, text means what? You have to literally read the texts verbatim. ठीक है, आपको जैसा टेक्स्ट दिया गया है, you go on to read that particular text, and here you need to have some idea about philosophy. Okay, because of course the classics which are dealing with the political concepts, and I told you they're coming from political philosophy, so there are chances that a lot of philosophy might have been used, and that is why you need to have a very fair idea about the philosophy of those particular time, and only then you will be able to do the literal interpretation of that particular text. And as I told you, this approach is largely favored by Leo Strauss. Okay, now is it possible humanly to decipher or literally read the texts which were written thousands of years back? Do we have that kind of capacity? Now we might be moving towards that with the advent of AI and all, but in general, अगर आपको उस समय की language ही नहीं पता है, if you don't know anything, you don't have a broader understanding of the background of those times, that why certain particular text is written. Say for example, if 500 years down the line, you would try to understand the parliamentary system that is operating today, you will have to definitely understand 500 years from now what was the actual politics which was going on. Got it? So the difficult part about this approach is, and they are criticized for it, is that first of all, it's very difficult to understand the philosophy all the time. Nobody might have this kind of idea. Then if you're literally interpreting text, this may not be possible because human language might not be developed to such an extent. Got it? And that is why it is not possible to literally interpret a particular text, because language keeps on changing, language is not constant. But then still those who believe in textual approach, they believe that why you read classics in the first place. You read classics in the first place because they are eternal texts. Okay, and therefore we should not be playing with the sanctity of these texts. So if you use any other method apart from this textual interpretation or literal interpretation, somewhere down the line you're playing with the sanctity, and you're undermining the very same thing which made them classics. And as I told you, आगे जाकर के there will be the rise of behavioralism. Okay, behavioralism is what? Making use of science, scientific methods, data, so on and so forth to understand political science. Now, using data and all, it might mean that you're not doing the textual thing. You're making political science more natural science. Now, that will create a crisis, and that is why Leo Strauss will stress that we should be limiting ourselves to the original textual traditional approach, because if you're not focusing on philosophy, then there is no point of doing political science. So this is one set of interpretation, that is your textual interpretation, which will say that you have to go for as it is or literal interpretation of the text, because that's the only way forward, that's the only way to maintain the sanctity of your text. Now the second approach is contextual approach. Okay, and as I told you, this is largely followed by Lasky. Okay, this is also followed by Sabine. So see, what they believe is that it is not possible to interpret the text literally, and it will also won't make any sense. Supposedly, what was happening thousands years back, that might not be the situation today. So you will have to understand the context, why that particular text was written, what was the history at that point of time, how the politics was going on, and that is why they say that classics are useful as long as they are understood in the broader context of that particular time. If you are not invoking the history, the politics of those times, you will never be able to understand in general what kind of politics was happening back then. So, because politics itself is never ending. There is no start and finish in the politics, and political theories also do not have any concluding chapter. There is a statement by Sabine who says that political theory has no concluding chapter. Political science has no concluding chapter. Political theory has no concluding chapter because there is no foundational meaning in classics. Okay, classics में कोई foundational meaning नहीं होती है. जो होता है, what it makes is that you understand the background. Say for example, Thucydides, he wrote the history of Peloponnesian War. Okay, Peloponnesian War was a war between Athens and Sparta. Okay, so unless and until you don't understand the politics of that was going on between Athens and Sparta, you will never be able to understand Thucydides' history of Peloponnesian War. It is again a classic. Okay, we will make use of Peloponnesian War later on as well, but this can be used as an example that see, you can't understand things without understanding the history and the context of that particular time. Got it? So you have to go behind the history, politics, the characters, the story behind that, and only then you will be able to extract from the classics. Now, related to this approach, or you can say the middle approach between textual and your contextual, is the new Cambridge historians like Quentin Skinner. Okay, Quentin Skinner. Okay, they believe that it's not only that you have to understand the politics or the history of that time. What you have to understand is the history of language or the context of language or the context of language. Okay, because language is also not neutral. As I told you, that sometimes a philosopher might be writing to speak truth to the power, but then he can't speak truth so much openly. He will try to hide the language. So जैसे there is one thinker, Gramsci, okay, he wrote a book, Prison Notebooks. Now it's very difficult to decipher him because he used to scribble down things. He used to use lot of you can say hidden language because he could not write it openly. He was a prisoner, ठीक है, Mussolini's prisoner. So similarly, say for example, in India, if you see, if you talk about the term dharma, okay, now dharma means lot of things, but when British came, they equated dharma with religion, and that is how things started getting worse in Indian politics and all, use of religion, communalization, so on, so forth. So that is why the Cambridge historians like Quentin Skinner, they believe that it's not sufficient either to literally interpret text or just to understand the history or politics of those times. Rather, what is required is that we must also look into you can say the history of language, what kind of terms are being used, why these terms are being used. Got it? So you have to not only understand the history of that times, you have to also understand the history of the language, how and why that particular language was used. Only then you will be able to do justice to the interpretation of classics. And that is why, you know, Quentin Skinner, he has criticized both textualist and contextualist. Textualist ka to I told you that there is a general criticism that you can't interpret things as it is, you will have to contextualize things. But he is also criticizing contextualists on three grounds. First is myth of foundationalism. Myth of foundationalism. Okay. This, he says that those who go for any kind of interpretation, contextual, textual, they believe that the author or the scholar might have given one fundamental idea in his classical text. He's saying no, it might not be the case. There is a case that the scholar or philosopher might be giving multiple ideas. There are chances that author might not be trying to give any idea. He just might be writing for his own entertainment. So first is myth of foundationalism. Second is myth of coherence. Okay, myth of coherence. What is myth of coherence? What is coherence? See, coherence means that one person thinks and writes in a similar manner all the time. Matlab, I was writing or thinking the same when I was 10. I am writing and thinking the same when I am 20. I am writing and thinking the same when I am 40. This is something too much to ask for. The myth of coherence says that a particular author or scholar might have written multiple books, and it is not necessary that his bend of thinking and writing or his bend of argument would remain same all the time. And therefore, if you think that by literally interpreting or by bringing in the context of different write-ups which that particular scholar has written, you will be able to understand the whole of his personality, the whole of his idea, then that's something too much to ask for, and that is what is known as myth of coherence, which largely means that there might not be any coherence between different writings of the same author. Got it? And third is the myth of prolepsis. Okay, prolepsis. Prolepsis means that you are mixing two different things. Got it? Supposedly, author might have written something in his own times because that thing might have mattered, or that thing might have been performed in a certain manner at that point of time. Ab us samay ki cheez you are linking with the modern time. Say for example, a lot of controversy keeps on happening around Manusmriti. So see, Manusmriti might have been written back then, but how you interpret it today, that matters. Okay, so you can't overstretch two ideas, you can't overstretch two times, and you can't start comparing two things uncomparable. You can't compare mango with apple. This is what myth of prolepsis is saying, that when you try to contextually interpret something, you are trying to unnecessarily mix, match and compare two things, which should not be done. Got it? And that is why Quentin Skinner says that it would be better that if you go for understanding uh, the theory, the context and history of the language. Got it? Now, the last approach of interpretation is known as interpretative approach. Interpretative approach, and basically this is coming from postmodernism and post-structuralism. Postmodernism and post-structuralism. Okay? Now, when we say modernism, modernism basically means that it's a belief that every problem has a solution, or everything can be defined, or everything can be understood in a perfect manner. ठीक है? साइंस तो जो होती है, साइंस प्रमोट्स वेरिफिकेशन, साइंस प्रमोट्स वैलिडिटी, साइंस प्रमोट्स सर्टेनिटी. Okay, so modernism is all about certainty. That means everything out there can be understood with some theory, some formula, some concept. The postmodernists will say that no, you can't understand everything, because a few things might be beyond human's rationality, beyond human understanding, and even language and those things keep on changing. The interpretation keeps on changing. It is beyond human capacity to keep a tab on everything and keep understanding everything. Okay? There is one famous statement by Derrida that every understanding is misunderstanding. Every understanding is misunderstanding. So postmodernism and then post-structuralism. So see, when we talk about structuralism, structuralism largely indicates that language has a structure. Okay, language has a structure, which means that every reality can be described in just one word. So if I say the word red, immediately you start imagining the color red. Got it? That connection that this particular word is establishing between your imagination of color red and the term color red, that is structuralism. But then post-structuralism will say that no, even language is fluid. Got it? Supposedly a child is trained, उसको बचपन से बताया गया है that he has been called red, but he has been shown the color green. So in that context, you can't say that red and green are one and the same thing. You can play with the idea, you can change the whole conception. And that is why post-structuralism will again say that even language is not fixed. Since language is not fixed, you can't even understand the theory or the context of the language. And that is why Derrida and all, they will suggest that if you are going for reading any text, you go for deconstruction of the text. Okay, deconstruction matlab break down everything. You try to reread, try to understand everything behind that. You will have to deconstruct everything. You will have to reinterpret everything. You don't have to believe in what the normal interpretation has been given or made you to understand till now. You will have to change that. And you have to go for double reading. Okay, you will have to go for double reading. What is double reading? Always in a society, there are two views. One is dominant view. Dominant view is generally of elites, the powerful people operating in the society. Other is non-dominant view. Okay, non-dominant view means views of non-elites. जैसे इंडिया में if you see, there can be two interpretation. ठीक है, say for example, when we talk about Varna system, okay, so Gandhi's interpretation was different, the dominant view, but Ambedkar's interpretation of Varna system was very different. Okay, so what Derrida is suggesting is that you will have to go for deconstruction. You will have to look into the myth which has been created around any interpretation, any classic. This can be done with double reading when you understand the dominant perspective, the hegemonic perspective, and the non-hegemonic perspective. Only when you do the both kind of exercise, only then it would be possible to reach to the conclusion, or only then it would be possible to holistically understand. But even once you are done with that, is there a guarantee that you have actually found what classic has to convey? No, even then there is no guarantee that you might have reached what you wanted for, because according to Derrida, every understanding is misunderstanding. ठीक है, और जो हमने बोला dominant view, there is one more philosopher, Foucault, who says knowledge is power. Knowledge is power, which means those who are at the position of power, they can always twist and turn what knowledge is going to the common man, okay, because they dominate the structures, they dominate the whole system. They can, any by which manner they can twist and tweak the knowledge system. So you can't actually take much away from the classics if you go with the textualist approach or the contextualist approach. It's a difficult thing, because there will be biased opinions, there will be biasness. So it's better that you go for deconstruction, it's better that you go for double reading. So this is the third approach, the final approach, interpretative approach. So this is all about classics. Okay, what are classics? They're class apart, they are authoritative text. Why they are authoritative text? Because they are dealing with some eternal issues. The way they are dealing it, that is also quite commendable. They are going for a very deep analysis of that particular portion, and that is why classics, it's very difficult to interpret the classics. There are different methods. That is why we call it hermeneutics, which is the method or science of interpretation. And we largely look into three types. One is textual, other is contextual, and third is interpretative. Got it? So this was your lecture number 1, where we tried to understand what is political science, where it is coming from, the nature, scope, how it has evolved, how the polis or the city state has evolved, how we talk about nation states, what is nation state, and then we eventually understood that where do we get the concepts, vocabulary, the language that political science makes use of. That is largely coming from the text. Which kind of text? Classical texts like Plato's Republic. Got it? So this is all from my side in the lecture. Thank you. Have a good day.